Welcome to the Fundraising Elevator, where we're all headed up. This podcast is a production of Swaim Strategies, a consulting firm dedicated to nonprofit fundraising events. We're coming to you today from the studios of the AV department. Please welcome our hosts, Kristin Steele and Samantha Swaim.
Hello, and welcome to Season 3 of the Fundraising Elevator, where we're all headed up. We are thrilled to be kicking off our third season. Kristin, I can't believe we're already here.
I can.
Well, as we kick off this, the start of this season, we want to make sure that we highlight a couple of things for you. You are probably deep in fall fundraising right now, and events are coming up quickly. So we want to make sure that you tag on your calendar and that you check out the Elevate Conference, March 3rd and 4th of 2026. It is our annual deep dive into fundraising event school. And we have a two-part conversation that we are kicking off the season with. So we are joined by one of our superheroes, Dr. Paul Zak, today on the show, and he's going to be joining us for two conversations while we dive into all of his research in human connection. So let me introduce Dr. Zak to you all. A couple of things. First, he is a neuroscientist, and he is on a personal quest to understand human connection, one of our favorite things. He started several transdisciplinary fields, including neuroeconomics, neuromanagement, and neuromarketing. He's a professor at Claremont Graduate University and one of the first to identify the role of oxytocin in creating trust. His TED Talk on oxytocin has over 1.9 million views. If you haven't watched it, I highly recommend. He's the author of Immersion, Trust Factor, The Moral Molecule, Moral Markets, and his newest publication, The Little Book of Happiness. Dr. Zak, welcome to the show. We're so glad you're here.
Thank you so much.
Well, let's kick off first by talking about human connection. I'm curious about your personal quest. Why are you on a personal quest for human connection?
You know, there's this old saying that all research is me search. So, maybe I have some issues I'm trying to work out here by studying the humans. No, I think, the sort of classical view in evolutionary biology is nature is red in tooth and claw, and we should just grab all kinds of stuff whenever possible and steal and hurt each other. And certainly that happens on occasion, but what we see often is great cooperation, lots of altruism, people helping each other. And my idea, 25 years ago was that this was driven somehow by brain mechanisms associated with connection. And really looking at the animal literature, I adapted that to study oxytocin in humans. So real slippery little molecule, has a short half-life, hard to measure, and had to figure out a way to do that. And so what we discovered, as many people know now, is oxytocin is this key signal that tells us a person around us is safe or trustworthy. And not only that, increases our empathy for that other person and motivates helping behaviors. And so it explains that kind of big conundrum that was missing in evolutionary biology, which is, why are we ever nice to each other?
I feel like we all need to be talking about why are we ever nice to each other more.
It's true.
Sure.
If you've seen or heard us present anything, Sam and I, in the last 10 years, you've heard us talk about Paul's video, Empathy, Neurochemistry, and the Dramatic Arc. You've also heard us jump up and down about his ideas on immersion, specifically because both of those pieces really intersect with our work in live events, in gathering humans in space together. And it's about the gathering itself, right? Humans in community with one another. Mm-hmm. And it's also about the storytelling that happens at those events and how that can happen in a way to make those people come together. I'm wondering if you can talk to us a little bit about the impact of storytelling.
Sure. So as we looked at stimuli to induce the brain to release oxytocin and then behaviorally follow what happens, as you guys know, I had a bit of a meltdown watching a movie on an airplane and shared this with one of my colleagues, a father-daughter story, and I have daughters, and he's a psychologist. I'm not a psychologist. He said, oh yeah, psychologists use videos all the time to affect people's emotional states. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. I wonder if those videos, those stories induce the release of oxytocin. So we began to run experiments on that and found essentially two kind of core factors. And first, to set this up, the brain's a very energy-hungry organ. And so fundraising, getting anyone to do anything is a very hard lift because it requires a metabolic investment. So somehow you've got to convince this organism, the brain of this organism, that whatever you're doing is important. And so what we found is that storytelling is about the most effective way to sustain what I've called neurologic immersion. Immersion is this network I've named for how the brain values social emotional experiences. So what is valued is what is remembered and acted on, right? So again, I'm a behavioral neuroscientist. I'm not so interested in feelings. I'm not really interested in if you like something. I'm interested in, does this induce a behavior? So you can see how evil I am. I don't care if you like it or not. We find a lot, we don't, as you guys know, a lot of work in advertising, and a lot of really effective ads are not likable in the classical sense.
Right.
But they're like, they kind of put this little bug in your brain, and it's that bug we call immersion that goes, oh, this is really important to me right now. So from a live event space, from a fundraising space, story is a really effective way to convey information, to sustain that emotional commitment to value this experience. And we could think of sort of 3 dimensions for that, and the fourth would be live. Sorry, I'm going to go on a little bit of a rant, but you asked such a good question, I want to answer it fully. So those 3 dimensions are, first, the way you structure that story. So it's really a human scale story. It's not statistics. It's not a giant PowerPoint deck. It's really telling this human scale story of someone, often someone in need, someone who needs our help. And again, if I can induce oxytocin release and some other neurochemicals, dopamine in particular, that's associated with attention to the experience, then I can potentially move people to engage in those helping behaviors. So first, how I structure that story. So classic narrative arc. The second is how I prepare the audience for that story. So I call this readiness, or sometimes it's called psychological safety. I've got to make you comfortable. I've got to open up bandwidth in your brain so that that story will actually be processed. So if you're tired, if you're hungry, if your butt hurts from sitting for too long, it's not going to be as effective, right? So I want to make people comfortable, have them be in a receptive mode. And the third is how I deliver that. So all of us have been to way too many conferences with some dude who's just droning on, and you just want to stick needles in your eyes. So what we found is that the delivery matters, that immersion is contagious. And so if I'm excited, if I'm putting, like I'm right now, I'm excited to talk to you guys. This is exciting. This is, decades of my life to put into this. If I'm excited, then that contagion of immersion induces this higher valuation and a higher likelihood that your audience will take an action. So make the audience comfortable, tell a human scale story, and deliver it with some passion, with some energy. This is why sometimes I'm having individuals who are part of that group that you want to help, a patient, a child, someone who can actually relay that story or be part of that story, be on stage, is a really effective way because, again, facial expressions, our voice conveys so much emotion, and most of this valuation network comes from this unconscious emotional response that it invokes when we hear a story. Then lastly, sorry, one more thing. The fourth component is together. So what I found is that if I convey this story one-on-one, fine, or by video, fine. But if I do it in a group, we have this, again, this contagion effect where the audience now kind of infects each other with more emotion. So if we're shoulder to shoulder, for reasons I can guess, but I don't know for sure, that we get a greater immersion response than the same story delivered by video or just on a one-to-one person. And this is kind of interesting because we thought, well, one-to-one, we're talking about relationship building. If I talk to my key donor and sit down with him or her and talk about what we're doing, isn't that more effective? Turns out that having a little group there is actually better. So that's a kind of a key takeaway that people can use, hopefully. Bring a couple colleagues with you, invite the spouse of your key donor, have a couple of people around, or again, have a student, a patient, to someone who's going to get a benefit from this so they can meet them. All that kind of adds to that energy level that, again, the brain is trying to really manage as effectively as possible and just kind of idle. And I guess lastly, sorry, I'm really a long answer of your great question.
No, good answer.
Talk all day.
If you don't get the immediate response that you want, again, if this is a high immersion experience, as you guys probably know, highly emotional experiences are saved in the brain in a very particular way
Mm.
that makes them more easily accessible. So it doesn't mean you failed. It means you've kind of made your pitch. You said, here's what's going on. We think this is really important. We think it aligns with your interests and values. And we'd love to have you make a commitment right now. And if that doesn't happen, then you can say, look, I want to follow up in a week. Why don't you just think about this? And again, if that story is well structured, if that presentation is well structured, it's like your little, I always think of this as my sweet little grandma in my brain going, hey, Paul, do this thing, do this thing. So if you can do that, if you can plant your little
Yeah.
grandma into
Uh-huh.
Yep.
your donor's brain, then he or she will again remember that, particularly when you recall that, hey, remember, it was great to have lunch with you last week, and we talked about our children with brain cancer, and we're starting raising money for this new center, and we'd love to be a part of it. And that's going to bring back just that little trigger, that kind of prime will bring back the full story that you gave them. So I think it's an ongoing process. And I do fundraising. I'm in a
Mm-hmm.
nonprofit as well, as like you guys are. And, there's no coercion, right? So, in
Right.
my book, Immersion, there's a whole chapter on whether it's ethical to actually try to persuade people to do something. But we're social creatures. We persuade each other all the time.
Yeah.
I've been 30 years. I'm still trying to persuade my wife to stay married to me. I still have to be nice to her, right? So, and vice versa, I hope. So that's what we do. So it's not unethical for fundraisers to talk to people, to ask them if they would like to help. We're social creatures. We tend to want to help people. That's part of the way our brain developed, and it's why we're so social.
Well, in that answer, you gave us a whole bunch of pieces that I want to dive into a little bit, because I think in the fundraising world, we're always looking at how we do the most with the least. And we're trying to figure out how our effort and our attention to our donors yields the biggest response. And we found that in your work, there were so many key tactical solutions, because so much of your work dials into how do we make someone a forever fan, right? Like, how do we bring them into
Yep.
our world, our product, our cause, and really move someone to stay attached to us. So I want to talk first about the chemicals that you referenced. So you talked about chemicals that impact the brain: cortisol, dopamine, oxytocin. You call oxytocin the moral molecule. You have an entire book about oxytocin. Can you just, for the layman who hasn't spent a lot of time diving into neuroscience, can you just talk to us a little bit about those chemicals and what impact they have on our thinking and our feeling and our beliefs, and sort of what they do to the brain?
Small
Yeah.
question.
I'll try to do it without any jargon. So what we found is that to influence someone to take an action, again, I'm a behavior guy, so I'm not interested in your self-reported feelings. Although it's nice if you enjoy the time together, and that's all good. But again, I'm an action guy. Um, the first thing you've got to do is capture attention. And so that attention is an arousal state. Again, the brain's trying to just idle and modulate that energy. And so that's associated with the action of a neurochemical called dopamine binding to the prefrontal cortex. So for listeners who have ADD or have kids with ADD, the standard drugs for ADD, Ritalin, Adderall, increase exactly that, dopamine in the prefrontal cortex, and that's why you get greater attentional responses. So the first thing you've got to do is capture attention. Again,
Mm.
this lazy brain is just trying to chill out, and now you enter the room, and you've got to do something that stimulates that attentional response, right? So I think oftentimes in the fundraising world, we start really easily. Again, I want that person to be relaxed. So a meal is a great way to do that. A meal
Yep.
is very relaxing physiologically. So now what do? Well, I've actually got to open hot, right? So I've actually got to say, hey, thrilled you're here. We have a big problem. We have a problem we need to solve now, and we want to get you involved in it. Oh, okay. Well, holy crap. I was eating my lunch, and now I'm finished with dessert, having a coffee, and something's happening, right? So I think for people listening, don't be afraid to kind of be a little bit aggressive on that open, because from a neuroscience perspective, if you're too soft on that opening, then you don't get this kick in of the dopamine effect. You need
Mm.
that present response. You have to have that person be present. So we found is that oxytocin alone is not enough. The first thing that's got to happen is I've got to kick you in gear so that your brain, if you tell me a good story, will subsequently cause a release of oxytocin that induces that empathy response and a desire to help. So open hot, and now use your storytelling. Use, by the way, I'm a big fan of props. You mentioned my TED Talk, which is very nice. The TED people really like props. I think props are a great way to mix it up. So we have found by measuring, as you know, we create a software product anyone can use that measures neurologic immersion in real time. And one of our real heavy users is Accenture, the big professional services
Yep.
organization. And they use it to quantify training. Is the training getting in your brain? So higher immersion correlates strongly with information recall, as I sort of suggested earlier. And they found that you've got to actually switch it up every 20 minutes because that brain really wants to return to baseline. If I'm talking for more than 20 minutes, I've got to mix it up. So a prop is a way to do that, or a short video. So in general, shorter, more intensive is going to have higher immersion and a higher likelihood of inducing either behavioral action right now or, again, that high memory response that you can pull on later. So short, intense. Again, that's kind of counter to a lot of traditional
Yeah.
fundraising, I think,
Yeah.
which is build a relationship. Again, this is easier when you have a relationship with the potential donor, but you really got to put it out there. This is sales, and you've got to sort of ask for the sale and make a strong case for this. Again, not too strong, right? If you go too far, it becomes aversive, and now you stress me out. So that's where experience comes in. That's where guidance comes in. Pre-testing your message comes in. Practice it. And I think it's all the pros are really good at providing these storytelling messages. The ones I've worked with are some of them are amazing. But I think it's still, if you have a new pitch, try it out, try it on your friends, try it before you take it to a donor, get it to be really tight and then get some feedback. By the way, just a quick aside, you have about 10 months to, when you're giving a TED Talk, right? You have to memorize 18 minutes.
Yeah.
And I workshopped it for all that time. And anyway, I think a couple of weeks before I was practicing with a bunch of friends, so 2 or 3 times, give me feedback, right? So rehearsing, really important. And one of my dear friends who, sat through this many, many times, she said, "You're stressing me out because your hands are you're so worried about finishing all the words you've written and memorized that you're just not relaxed." And so I think if people watch that TED Talk on stage, I look pretty relaxed because I have done it so many times. It was just like natural. So you are performing, and just like you would want to, if you're an actor on stage, you want to practice this. Don't have your hands clenched. Don't be stressed. You've done this a million times. Just relaxed. And, it is a numbers game, fundraising. And so anyway, my knees were shaking when I first got on the stage. So I've spoken a million places. But I got the first laugh and then it all went fine. So, think about that. Think about making that audience comfortable as well. Open hot. You always want to get them going, but then have something that lets them just flow into the story you're telling.
Yeah. I think you've touched on a few things that I want to underscore for folks, even just in your example of that TED Talk, 10 months, right? Time is an element of well-crafted things when we think about, I think often our fundraising friends, when they're planning their event, the program piece, the story piece is the last piece they start thinking about, and they think about it up against a deadline. And so that truncates their ability to really think through, where are the hitches? Where are my hands clenched? Where, how am I engaging folks? I think sometimes also we take for granted what people understand a well-crafted story looks like. So I'm wondering if you can, from the brain perspective, because it all attaches, right? We have dramatic arc in our body, in our DNA, and in what we do. But I think, what does a well-crafted story look like so that folks can start thinking about that architecture and how to move their stories into that space?
Yeah, a great question. There's can I use one semi-bad word? Am I allowed?
Of course.
So
Use them all.
I taught a course. My university asked me last year to teach a course on how to write your dissertation. So that's storytelling for big people.
Yeah.
Because I've had over 100 PhD students go through my lab, and I've got optimized, how to do this. And the writer, Stephen Pressfield, wrote a wonderful little 120-page short book called "No One Wants to Read Your Shit." Start with that.
Yeah.
So it's a great little book. You can get it for, I don't know, 10, $12 on Amazon. Start with no one actually wants to hear your story. Let's presume that. How do I break through that? Right. So if
Yeah.
you've got someone they're talking to, live in person, they've made a commitment because they're meeting you for sure. So the first thing is I want to tell an effective story. I don't want to wander. As Sam said, you want to practice this a lot. I want to have a very tight, organized story. So the story components are introducing characters. Um, Often they're in an unusual setting. That's a good attention grabber. I need to get that attention first. And then have them go through some kind of crisis, generate tension. That evolving tension is very important. Again, I've got to make an emotional case. That decision is emotional
Yeah.
largely on making a donation. And so I've got to illustrate how important it is. So I think of the storytelling affecting behavior as a sort of monkey see, monkey do, right?
Yep.
I see humans who are doing this thing, they're having a crisis and they're working it through. And then a donor comes in, or then an institution comes in and helps them resolve this crisis they're in. And then that donor can see himself or herself in that setting and say, "Oh, I understand." You don't have to say that explicitly, but they will understand that, there is an important role for institutions, for organizations, and for individuals to be able to step up and help resolve this. So, human scale story with real emotion, and it's hard. So I'm again, just sort of full disclosure. I'm not a super emotional person. I'm kind of emotionally flat, and that's okay. If you're in a car accident and you're bleeding out, I will save your life. That doesn't bother me. I don't freak out about things. I'm also not going to cry at movies very much. I do occasionally, but I'm just not my thing. And so you have to think about, how to engage the emotions of someone who may be a potential donor. What does he or she really care about? What have they
Yeah.
obviously given to in the past in terms of fundraising? Um, what's most important to them? What's their personality like? So I talk in the immersion book about kind of matching that story to personality types. So again, because I'm a thinker, I'm in my brain, I'm an introvert, right? I'm going to respond much better to this kind of very rational story. Like every dollar we raise can save, 8 lives of children in Africa or whatever. Okay, that's very rational. That's kind of the way my
Yeah.
brain works. I still want a story to talk about these African. I just got back from Africa and it was in Uganda, and amazing beauty, amazing place, and amazing poverty,
Yeah.
and also a country that's, by the way, doing very well, and that poverty is reducing every year, which is wonderful. But you have to be able to put yourself with a film, with an artifact, with a story, with a person in, I saw schools that had no lighting. They had dirt floors. They had desks that were handmade. And you see children who are in uniforms with bare feet in, dirt floor. And you think, I mean, like, God bless them. They are working so hard to get educated, to improve their lives, and they have so few resources to do it. They don't have enough teachers. The buildings are terrible. And yet they have uniforms. They're sitting up straight. When we visitors came, they spoke to us in English, and they sort of had a script. People visit them all the time, so it was just beautiful. And we made donations, of course, right? We're visiting their a little rural school, and we're there to help. And so, I think having that richness of that story, if I was trying to get you to raise money for
Right.
Ugandan school, I would enrich that story. I would talk about a little girl or boy that I met, and how they live, and how their family sacrificed to get them that one uniform that they have to wash every night in the morning, how far they have to walk to get to school. All these are true statements, by the way. I'm not making this up. And so I think that authentic story, that's human scale, that illustrates an important human need for people who have some ability and means to give. I think it's a really way to engage them as something that's going to make them feel good about themselves. And by the way, as you know from the research on giving, people who give are generally happier.
Yeah.
They tend to have fewer health issues. They're more pleasant to be around because they feel good about themselves. They've done something important for the world. And as social creatures, nature isn't red in tooth and claw for us. We're so, privileged to be in a situation where we can help other people. And when we recognize that and how important it is to our own psychological health, yeah, we can tell our friends and whatever. And it's, if you want to brag about giving money for a building. I mean, I guess that's fine. But, I think for many people who give, it's quiet. They don't really want recognition. They have some means and the ability to help. And that's such a beautiful thing, right?
Yeah, it is.
Well, as we dive a little bit further into storytelling, we're going to take just a quick break. As Paul said, mix it up every 20 minutes. So we're going to take a quick break to hear from our sponsors, and we'll be right back.
Ready to take your fundraising to the next level? Need to get unstuck in your event planning? Now's your chance to connect directly with the experts behind the fundraising elevator. Book a one-on-one consulting session with Sam for strategic planning and fundraising strategy, with Kristin for your programming and storytelling, or Mary for your registration and data tools. They're here to provide you personalized answers to all your event questions. Don't wait. Raise more at your next fundraising event. Book your session today at swaimstrategies.com. You can also find the link in our show notes.
Welcome back. We are here with our hero, Dr. Paul Zak. We are talking about stories and the brain and all good things for fundraising. Do stories make humans more empathetic?
An effective story increases what's called empathic concern. So empathy is sort of sharing of cognitive or emotional states. Empathic concern is particularly this sharing of an emotional state with a desire to help. And I think that's one of the real outstanding things we found over the last 20 years looking at storytelling is that when we see this peak immersion experience, so dopamine response, oxytocin response, it says, oh, this is really important to you, the organism. And that's facilitated it's facilitated physiologically, but the feeling state of that is one of empathy, that now I feel connected to the experience of this person who is suffering in some way. And again, I think it's very interesting that humans, it happens a little with other animals, but humans in particular have such an interest in caring. So I mentioned I was in Uganda and was on a trek to see gorillas, and there were people there who were older. Who this was really hard. It's like four inlets called the Volcanoes National Park, and steep. You have to help people. Like there were some guides and things, but like people who were falling in the mud and steep slopes, and everyone's sweaty and you're gross. And then in our kind of normal organized, clean American life, like you don't want to be touching sweaty, gross people, but now you're thrown into this world. Now you have to help people out. I mean, people slipped, people got hurt, not hurt seriously, but hit skin their knees, and there's rocks, and so people are holding hands, and that's this kind of caring approach that is pretty unusual for other animals. So again, for people listening, it's not abnormal, it's not weird for us to help other people. And we can do that directly, holding someone's hand who's falling, or we can do it indirectly by giving money or time or volunteering. It's a very natural human endeavor. So I think sometimes some of the fundraisers I've spoken to think, it's kind of forcing people to give money. No, first, I can't force anybody to do anything, I don't think, as long as they're cognitively intact and they can say no and there's no gun to their head. But you're giving them an opportunity to do something really human, really important. And that sense of empathy, that sense of connection to others, that emotional connection is super valuable. So one argument I make in the immersion book is that the more we have these peak immersion experiences, the more we train our brains to be present and emotionally open. And again, people who are present and emotionally open are more pleasant to be around. They have deeper, more powerful relationships. They live longer, happier, and healthier. So think of fundraising as part of this continuum of activities that people can engage in that are very psychologically and physiologically helpful to themselves. So it's not only that it's good for the organization, it's actually good for the donor.
Yeah. And if we don't present them those opportunities,
right.
someone
else
else will. Someone else will. Yeah, that's right.
So I think there's some tension. I would love your feedback on this because I'm not a fundraising pro at all. about relationship building versus when the ask comes. So,
Mm.
um, I have a software company, so I'm talking to, companies all the time about using our software. And so I meet someone and say, look, here's a problem. If you have this problem, our software can solve it. And so I kind of make that ask pretty quickly. But I think in fundraising, in my experience, it's more like relationship building over a period of time before you make an ask. Is my view correct or no?
I think it
Help me
depends on the
understand.
size of the ask
Yeah.
sometimes. Often there are some lower level engagements and lower level asks that get made to gauge people's interest in the cause. And then sort of a period of cultivation and relationship development can happen. And then you're continuing to move the needle on the size of that ask and figuring out what they're responding to, what stories you're telling them, what compels them towards your cause, and what that looks like is sort of some of my immediate thoughts. Sam?
Yeah, I want to dive into the moment we
Yeah.
ask at events, because in that moment, there's sort of two things at play. There's the donor that we have a deep relationship with, that typically is a larger donor who is already very integrated into the work. And then there's the new donors that come in that moment and show their interest and express their interest. So we've taken a lot of your recommendations and study and science and applied it to what we think is the most important element of the event. So in a fundraising environment, we want to make sure the guests are comfortable, that they're seated, that they're attentive, that they're focused, that they already have some storytelling about the work of the organization so they understand what we're raising money for, who we're raising money for. But then we have this moment where we get everyone focused, we bring the lights down, and we tell them we have an important story to share. We then bring up a video that is a short 3 to 4 minute video about a single story of impact on a very traditional narrative arc where they have a want or need or a desire. They're in search of it. And the organization is really the change agent that has made it happen for them. Then we bring the lights up and we introduce that person as being a real person in the room, and we bring them to the stage. And there's sort of a swell of energy that happens usually there because people understand that the person on the screen is actually in the room with them. And then that person...
And in some ways that story is real. It's
Right.
this galvanizing moment of like, oh,
This is a real person.
Yes.
And then that person turns to the audience and typically has a pretty genuine human reaction, whether it be awe or excitement or nervousness, but that elicits typically a response from the audience of some sort of support. And then they make that ask, the call to action. This organization has impacted me and I'm asking you to give. Then we start high with a paddle raise. We love to use a paddle because it's like an immediate, you can like respond immediately without there being a process you have to go through. It's easy. You show them how to do it. We always have our first 3 gifts known. We know that at that top level, a donor is already pre-committed to raise that paddle. And we know that we're going to have at least 2 more paddles immediately following so that we're creating momentum and hitting that tipping point. In that, we've applied the dopamine release, the oxytocin release, the good narrative arc that creates the empathetic connection of wanting to help. And then we've also shown them kind of how to do it in a way that feels really celebratory. I'm curious, after you've heard kind of our process, the brain connections that are happening in that moment, what sort of is at play that makes it that people act, that they actually move to the place of raising that paddle?
First of all, A+. I mean, I've never heard something so perfectly organized that's consistent with, 25 years of my research and lots of other people's research as well. So you guys are just knocking it out of the park. So it's very hard for me I can't even think of a way to improve what you've done. And for listeners, this narrative arc is really kind of the crux of what's going to happen here. I mean, having people in the room, having the pre-commitment, all that's really important. So if you're worried about telling that story, produce the story, right? Then you can edit it, then you can get feedback, then you can test it, kind of test market it before
Yes.
you roll it out. So I think all those are great. so many good things. So bringing the lights down. Now I'm building that anticipation. So from a brain perspective, that's preparing, that's that readiness, that's preparing the brain to release the dopamine response. So just like bringing the lights down in a movie theater. And so I'm focusing your attention now on this new thing. Now I have a change in task. My brain's going to kick in some resources like, oh, we were chit-chatting in the room, we're having a cup of coffee, having dessert, and now we're going to watch a little movie. That's great. And then having that person show up, that's a surprise. So this is really about sustaining neurologic immersion long enough and have a peak enough immersion experience that I'm provoked now to take an action. So that's about as good as it gets. I would say that I don't know how long that lasts, but if you can do that in the course of 20 minutes or less, you're probably going to get really better responses than if it runs out for an hour. So
Yes.
I really want to kind of keep, as you said, momentum, keep this momentum going. Again, because from a neuroscience perspective, the brain really wants to return to baseline so strongly where I'm just kind of idling and like, just getting by. And so again, fundraising's hard. Getting someone to do anything is hard, to ask them to do something, but you've got all the best elements right there. People together, surprise, movie, person, and who they're in the flesh. That genuine surprise, weird experience to be a person who's getting a benefit from this charity to actually show up in person. It's really odd. It feels very strange, and so seeing that genuine reaction, right, which is wonderful. So yeah, same thing again. Because I just got back from Africa a couple of days ago. When you see these children who are struggling in school, you cannot help but want to help them, right? We have enough money. I don't have a lot of money, but I have enough money I can put $10 in the jar or whatever. So I think because they were so genuine, they didn't know we were coming. We just came, and the principal took us around and said, would you like to see the school and the kids at school? Well, sure, of course I would. Yeah, I think that genuine reaction, that's a sort of a secret sauce that almost nobody does.
Yeah. I really want to thank you for continuing to underscore the idea of together. I think we're at a place in fundraising events, and we certainly saw this at the top of the pandemic, where the idea of together was in jeopardy.
Right.
And people are wrestling with that. Is it necessary? We did virtual events, and is it necessary? And there's a tension for what together looks like, I think, in many ways, if one looks at headlines, and that idea of being collaborative by being in space together is a very interesting thing. And the impact of telling stories in that space is also fascinating to me. Is there a scientific way to predict story success?
There is. I mean, we've developed this technology that anybody can measure neurologic immersion and edit that. The movie studios use our technology to create movie trailers. We have fundraisers using it. So there is a way to do it. People can test for free. So the website is your6.com, the number 6. You can just download the app. It pulls data from wearables. So it turns out your brain's connected to a body. And so you can just try this out yourself. Yeah, so we get signals from the cranial nerves or the output file of the brain through wearables like smartwatches. I think I would test this. Even if you don't use our technology, you could use some other technology or ask people or try it out. Again, rehearse it, edit it. They're super smart storytellers who know how to do this. But I think measurement's really important, trying to get an objective measurement. So just as an aside, from the immersion book I wrote, that one of the big TV networks has used our technology for years to test like new fall shows, or new shows they want. Maybe not fall. Shows happen all the time now, but anyway, new shows.
Yes.
And so for linear TV, they know that the problem they face is commercials, right? On that commercial break, people switch channels. And so you've got to put this emotional hook before a commercial. They know that. They're pros. They've been, there's a 100-year-old network. And yet, before they started using our technology, when we started collecting data from them, we found that they were only successful at producing an emotional peak 40% of the time, even though they knew they needed to do it. So there was this kind of sense of, what we think we're doing internally, because we're creating this where we're not normal. We actually need to test it on other people. And I think that's the important part is it's not for me to look good or be happy, it's for other people. So one more example for that. I spoke. I get to go to so many fun places, but Robert Redford's Sundance Institute
Yeah.
up in the Utah mountains on a conference on brand film, so brand storytelling. So it's about stories, right? So as you know, a lot of brands will produce films, short films that, to a greater or lesser extent, demonstrate their products and whatever. And most of these were awful, by the way. To just half of them were just stinkers. I mean, I don't have to measure my brain to just not like poor narrative arc, bad editing, hire a star to be there who wasn't interested. And some were just great and amazing. And so, again, knowing what to do and doing it are different
Yeah.
things. And so I think we all need feedback. We're all imperfect. And if we come in humbly, so it could be one of those big donors. It's a great way to kind of co-create and say, hey, Mr. Smith, we're going to have this big event. And here's the film that we kind of a rough of this film. We'd love your feedback. Well, think how honored if he or she has the time to give you, it's a 3-minute film. Could you watch it and give us feedback? Do you think it works? Does it not work? Also, small spaces are better. So let's talk about some cheats. Again, we want to be as effective persuaders as possible. Again, ethically, it's no problem. I want to be as good as possible. You can still say no. I'm not going to hit you if you say no. I want to be so small space. If you're shoulder to shoulder, it's actually better. It's physiologically better. You have a bigger immersion response. Number one. Two more things. My big giveaway from the TED Talk: hug people. I don't shake hands. I tell people I hug everybody. And so that's an immediate way to reduce oxytocin release and have that kind of warm connection already. So if you're comfortable doing that, you can do that. I can do it because I have gray hair now, so I'm not offending anybody. And the third is literally today we published research looking at using virtual reality in education for nurses. So it turns out that empathy for all clinicians, including nurses, improves patient care and also improves job satisfaction when you're able to be connected to that patient story. And we compared, since you talked about, this kind of virtual events, a 2D film versus a VR film. And we found the VR film had 60% more peak immersion, that it just grabbed the brain a lot more.
Wow.
And increased empathic concern. And that induced, when you had higher empathic concern, people volunteered to help out for a new experience. And so there's that pathway. High, peak immersion experience induces empathic concern, which causes an observable action. And so I think that's the pathway fundraisers should think about as well.
Yeah.
I love that we've been working with Hungry Mantis, which is a VR production company, and they do specifically just nonprofit fundraising stories. And their work is pretty incredible because you often get to go somewhere and see something you wouldn't be able to feel like you could experience another way, including, even make-believe places, right? They, or maybe not make-believe, but places we can't go yet, like Mars. They were doing a project that was all about how to immerse people in the potential of the research they were doing on Mars. So it was a cool way to be able to see something that you wouldn't have been able to just like walk into the door of and see.
Yeah.
Well,
So I would say, that's fabulous. I would just say, if you're doing VR, do it at the event. Don't hope someone has a headset or mail them a headset.
Exactly.
Again, you still want that togetherness, right? So, hey, we have this amazing experience for you. We do some storytelling. Again, it doesn't have to be storytelling in mass. We have 3 headsets, and so we're going to move those around so you actually can experience the thing that we're really interested in talking about today. And so I think having that togetherness, still works.
Yeah. I love that.
Well, we're going to take a short break. And when we come back, I want to have Dr. Zach explain a little bit about his work with immersion, because next week's episode is going to dive deeper into that work. So we'll be right back.
Great.
Ready for your hard work to yield more funds at your next event? Join us at Elevate, a nonprofit fundraising event conference designed to bring our community together and make planning successful events easier. Register today for this hybrid conference on March 3rd and 4th, 2026 in Portland, Oregon, or join us online from anywhere. This isn't just another conference. You'll walk away with battle-tested strategies, hands-on tools, and proven templates that top fundraisers use to raise millions. Your mission deserves fully funded success. Register today at swaimstrategies.com.
Welcome back to the Fundraising Elevator, where we're all headed up. Tongue twister today. I want to dive just a little bit as we close out this episode and lead into our next conversation we're going to have about immersion. So immersion is not your most recent publication, but a book you published about 2-3 years ago. And in that publication, for us, a lot of the little dots and bits and bots and pieces of the logistics of what we do really came together in a comprehensive understanding of how the brain interacts with an experience. Yep. So not just with a story, but with an experience. I'm wondering, just as a little teaser to our conversation, if you could talk a little bit about sort of what the impetus was for the book and what you were sort of trying to get to the bottom to.
Oh, great. Yeah. This was, eventually it all comes to money. So running a neuroscience lab is expensive, and I'm a cheap guy. So, post 9/11, many academics, including myself, got pulled in to do homeland security kind of work, which was, it was just, you're around, it was a scary, scary time, right?
Yeah.
You knew the world had changed and it wasn't going to get better, at least not in the short term. And so part of the funding from post 9/11 work from the Department of Defense funded our lab to equip warfighters with a new superpower called persuasion. Could equip soldiers and sailors with ability to use communication, to use words rather than weapons, to try to encourage our allies and potentially our enemies to cooperate with us. And so we did millions of dollars of research funded by you taxpayers to identify the neural pathways through which a story would be effective at influencing behavior. And so, again, I think, it's easy to take shots at big government or whatever, but I think it was a very noble endeavor to think about, could we just use our words before we use violence? We should all want to do that. So that was really the first motivation is, again, we sort of had this idea that oxytocin might be part of it, but it was, as you know, a much richer and more complex technology. And then, developing tools that, at first, warfighters could use, but then eventually that anyone could use to create better experiences. And we all want great experiences at a restaurant, going to the movies. Man, it was like 30 hours to fly home from Africa, and I couldn't find a decent movie to watch. I think it's this curmudgeon old age or something. I'm like, none of this just seems interesting to me. So I'm going to work on my laptop for a while and then take a nap. So I think, there's a lot of intuition on what can work, and I'm much more of a measurement person. So it was really to create a measurement technology so that any experience we have, from telling a story, creating a movie, going out for a night with our friends, would be valuable.
Well, I'm excited in our next conversation to dive a little bit into how we adopted the CERTA sort of framework that you developed in that book, because it totally emphasized what was working, what we knew is sort of intuitively what was working, and put a lot of science behind it. But then it also kind of like leveled up our game. So thank you for joining us today. We're going to wrap up this episode, but we're going to continue talking. And we hope folks will tune in next week to learn a little bit more about your work with immersion and happiness. So thank you for joining us on the Fundraising Elevator. We look forward to seeing you all next week.
The Fundraising Elevator is produced by Swaim Strategies at the studios of the AV department. The program is produced and directed by Steve Osborne, with audio engineering and original music by Dwayne Anderson and Heidi Christensen. Video production by John Collier. Graphic design by Pendulum Creative Group. And voiceover by Josh Boykin.
Hey y'all, it's Kristin. Before we leave, I want to ask for your help to make the podcast grow. If you enjoyed what you heard today, please like, follow, and subscribe to the Fundraising Elevator. And if you're getting a lot out of the show, share it with a friend. Leave us a review. These things help make sure that the podcast continues heading up. Thanks so much for being here and tuning in.
Are you ready to engage supporters and grow your base with your own podcast? Then let us introduce you to our partners at the AV department in Portland, Oregon. In addition to delivering exceptional live event audiovisual production and videography, they also have a top-tier production studio and an expert team ready to take your content ideas to the next level. Contact the AV department to schedule a consultation and start bringing your podcast vision to life.